The mandate that has the whole world watching, and according to some, has the whole world worried. As Benjamin Netanyahu is set to form a government, the path seems relatively straightforward, as a coalition with religious Zionism, Shas, and United Torah Judaism would give his bloc a parliamentary majority. But this would make Netanyahu's Likud party the most ideologically left-wing in government, something that would be alien to Israel's longest-serving prime minister. And this has caused concern for Israeli President Isaac Herzog, who was caught on a hot mic implying that the whole world was worried about a government featuring Itamar Ben-Gvir, who himself is vying for the public securities minister position. But should the world be worried? Would Netanyahu feel more at home with the government filled with right-wingers, or will four sides of the same coin cause too much bickering? Would Netanyahu be better off including a centrist scapegoat to avoid being the most left-wing in government? Is the opposition strong enough to hold the government to account? What will the next Israeli government look like?
So let's get to it. What will or what should Israel's next government look like? As always, we begin with this quick fire round of 30 seconds each and pick up the conversation right after. Dr. Schwartz, take the lead, please.
Well, what exactly is the question?
What should Israel's next government look like?
Well, as many on the right want to say on the night of elections, the people have spoken. And according to the way Israel's coalition democracy or proportional representation democracy works, the party that can form a government, that is able to form a government of at least 60 or 61, will rule. And it seems quite imminent that the Netanyahu family, rather, that is returning to power, will be able to form this government. What was mentioned earlier in the promo, that the Likud and Netanyahu will be the most left-wing faction would appear to be true, but I don't see that as a problem for him.
Yes, we will continue from that point. Exactly, just to note before we do, numbers are just numbers. We tend to forget that every once in a while. The question is, what story are we building around them? Amit Deri, 30 seconds, please, your take.
Yeah, so I'm old enough, I'm young, but I'm old enough to remember 2016 when the world was so worried that Lieberman got the Minister of Defense at the time. And I remember the New York Times and elected officials in the US and other places. So I think Itamar Ben-Gvir is one man. And like Dr. Schwartz said, we are after elections, and the people said people of Israel voted for Ben-Gvir also. Personally, I would like to see a government, a right-wing government very soon that will invite all the others to join, but with right-wing guidelines.
Okay, Dan Perry, maybe you're telling us a different story around those numbers?
If Netanyahu forms a government with the far right and Haredi parties, as appears likely at this point, it will be a government that will probably badly undermine the rule of law, unsettle social cohesion in Israel, hasten the onset of theocracy, and quite possibly bring about a third intifada. So that scenario is so catastrophic that I wouldn't be at all surprised to see another one emerge in the form of a possible national salvation government with Lapid and Gantz.
Okay, and on that note, gentlemen, please feel free to interact from this point onwards. Dr. Schwartz, I would like to begin with you. Yair Lapid, Benny Gantz, if Itamar Ben-Gvir becomes a minister, as they're dreading, it will be on them, not on Netanyahu. They can join a government and create a different reality for Israel according to their desire.
Well, I think at first is necessary to clarify or flesh out the terms left and right. They've been rendered somewhat meaningless in Israel's political discourse over the past few years, because what is referred to as the center-left coalition, which may very soon be the opposition, is made up of individuals. The leaders of almost all those parties were all individuals who at one point had served under Netanyahu, all of whom left with the slamming of the door after it became clear that Netanyahu was not someone with whom they could work or someone whom they were able to trust. And the coalition against Netanyahu, ironically enough, is made up of people who at one point served with him. So the idea that they would somehow enter a government of national salvation and national unity after 5 successive election campaigns, which were essentially formed by people who refused to work alongside him, to me, that scenario seems very unlikely. My colleague, Mr. Deri, implicitly compared Lieberman with Ben-Gvir. I find that comparison somewhat inaccurate, to say the least. I think anyone who knows anything about Israeli politics and anything about the rather sordid history of Itamar Ben-Gvir knows that for the future Israeli government to appoint him head of the police is tantamount to appointing a convicted arsonist as head of the police department, head of the fire department.
Mr. Deri?
And I hope, I certainly hope
first, Lieberman wanted to take 300 or more thousand Arabs and move them, citizens of Israel, move them to the other side of the fence. So I remember,
Mr. Deri, I have to.
Lieberman being called a fascist. Just a second. Just a second, please. Yeah, I'm sure.
No, let's allow Mr. Deri to conclude his point, please.
I'm sure, Doctor, that's your opinion. I would like to say mine, and I think I represent some of the people in Israel. And I remember the days where Lieberman was a fascist. It was a disaster and a racist party that trying to move Arab citizens of Israel and take their land in al-Fahim and other places. So I'm not so worried. And yes, it's the far right that's going to form a government with Netanyahu. But I think Netanyahu is responsible enough to lead that coalition, very delicate coalition. And at the end of the day, Ben-Gvir is one person that's been elected by a lot of people in Israel, and I think he's got his place. But like I said before, I want to see part of Benny Gantz's party, and I think also Lieberman can join that coalition in the future.
Well, okay.
And we've seen things.
Mr. Perry, please, Dan
Mr. Deri. Everyone has the right to their opinion, but they should be called out when the opinion when false facts are presented as opinion. Lieberman did not propose to move 300,000 Arabs from their homes. Lieberman proposed to move the border of Israel so as to include those Israeli Arabs in a Palestinian Authority. Now, I'm not saying that was a great idea, but you suggested that he was going to move them physically away from their homes.
No, but Mr. Perry, if we're honest, it was framed that way in the context of the political climate back then, and I suspect that this is what Mr. Deri was alluding to. Lieberman was framed as extreme as Ben-Gvir.
But that just shows you how far the goalposts have moved. Because now you're attempting to compare between this notion of moving the border in order to have fewer Arabs in Israel, which may be seen as racist and not everyone needs to support, to a situation where we may have a security minister in Israel who bragged about being able to get to Rabin in a context where people were threatening to assassinate Rabin on TV, and who currently boasts of over 50 indictments against him, many of them on charges of terrorism. It's beyond belief that a person like this, who just, in recent months was filmed pulling a gun on people in parking lots, is going to be the security minister and the police minister. And it's not just one man. The nature of the security minister in Israel is such that they can have a real impact on how the police will react. For example, next time there's riots in Israel, and next time the Arabs riot, perhaps because of Israel's policies in the West Bank, it could be legitimately catastrophic and bring about a civil war.
I'm sorry, but I think the Israeli public most of the Israeli public prefers to have Ben-Gvir as a partner. I think he's part of the far left to blame on the rise of Ben-Gvir, than to sit with someone that is praying for the shaheeds and the terrorists
gentlemen,
and others.
With all due respect to Ben-Gvir, the discourse surrounding Ben-Gvir may be, but the decision-making is in the hands of Netanyahu, and perhaps not less crucial, Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz. And I want to circle back to the point where we started our debate. Gantz not recommending Lapid to the president to be prime minister. Is the center-left bloc, because of the bad blood, because of ego and animosity, blah, 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 do they keep on doing the same mistake? Dan Perry.
No, the center left ran a criminally misguided campaign where they didn't message anything for fear of waking up the right wing that was already woken up, and they failed to do basic tactical alignment to maximize the impact of what votes they got. It has been said on this show that the people have spoken and they voted in favor of the right. Nonsense. The right got about half the vote, and the opponents of Netanyahu got about half the vote. The reason the right has 53% of the Knesset is because the left allowed 6.5% of their support to fall beneath the electoral threshold because Lapid et al. Failed to prevent the splintering of several parties. And the result is what we currently see.
Dr. Schwartz, this is what happened. What should be happening from this point onwards? Is Lapid and Gantz and Michaeli and Lieberman even able to be a feisty opposition? Should they give a try on forming a different type of a coalition befitting their worldview?
I just want to reiterate the lack of utility in the terms right and left. And Dan, you said yourself, we had a right wing that gained slightly more than half the votes, and an anti-Netanyahu camp that gained the other half. But that anti-Netanyahu camp is not by definition center-left. It consists of parties and individuals who up until recently were squarely on Israel's right, even to the right of Netanyahu. So I would suggest for our purposes, for analytical clarity, we avoid those terms left and right. As for it was clear, I would agree with Dan that the Coalition for Change, or the outgoing government, the parties that made up the outgoing government and will likely represent the opposition this time around, were very factionalized, did not approach this campaign in the wiser strategic way that the right wing did, and the results are evident for all. But at the same time, my sense is that the work of the opposition in opposing a government featuring a convicted supporter of terror in a position of safeguarding the security of Israelis. I remind all of us that 20% of Israelis are Arab citizens. That's a slam dunk.
But again, if they were so adamant about this cause, they could potentially prevent it by teaming up with Netanyahu. But we'll have to stop right here and continue.
Once team up with Netanyahu, been there, done that.
Fair enough. And on that note, Dan, we will continue right after the break. We have to take a break, and we'll continue our debate right after we come back to the summit. We're still here, and we'll continue to unpack it all, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Dr. Raviv Schwartz, Amit Deri, and Dan Perry. Thank you, gentlemen, for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, but if unity talks remain just talk, and a right-wing coalition is indeed in the making. In other words, post-politics, what would the policy of a right-wing government going to be? Let's take a listen first and pick up the conversation from there.
Here at the president's residence in Jerusalem, Israeli President Isaac Herzog is holding consultations one by one with delegations from the different factions and parties in the incoming Israeli parliament. But of course, in addition to these consultations here at the president's residence, also coalition negotiations are going on with incoming Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the various parties. This, of course, is a much more ideologically cohesive coalition than the outgoing one, with a lot more agreement than disagreement on matters of policy. One of the main items on the agenda, an override clause that would allow the Israeli parliament to override decisions by the Supreme Court that would purport to nullify legislation. This is very, very controversial on the other side of the political spectrum that sees this as a potential impairment of human rights. But of course, within the coalition, generally agreement on moving forward with that override clause. There are, of course, some policy differences. For example, the issue of Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, of course, an important cause cause to far-right lawmaker Itamar Ben-Gvir, who has made this a flagship cause of his. On the other hand, the two ultra-Orthodox parties, the United Torah Judaism faction and the Shas party, against the idea of Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount because the rabbinic authorities that they follow do not allow it. At any rate, all of these differences have to be ironed out, as well as the important question of which politicians and which parties get different ministerial positions, all of that part of the coalition negotiations that are ongoing. Owen Alterman, I-24 News, Jerusalem.
And this is, of course, I-24 News senior diplomatic correspondent Owen Alterman, keeping tabs for us on all the latest in Israeli politics from the president's residence in Jerusalem. Let's begin our conversation with another quick fire round of 30 seconds each, and somewhat echoing what Dr. Schwartz alluded to earlier. Is the so-called right-wing bloc really on the same page when it comes to policy? Amit Deli.
So I think the most interesting ministry that is now, as we speak, is on debate and emphasize the differences inside the future coalition is the Minister of Finance between Smotrich from the Tzionut Hadatit and Aryeh Deri from Shas. Aryeh that is representing more the left, the socialist left, and Smotrich that is more free market. And it will be very interesting to see what will be the decision of Netanyahu on that specific ministry, one of the most important, especially now with the cost of living.
But also a political graveyard, if we're honest, to an extent. Dan Perry, 30 seconds are on.
I think there are divisions in the right. Netanyahu's allies essentially are extremely traditional, religious, and even fanatically religious, ultra-nationalists, and fundamentally anti-democratic. And I don't think Netanyahu is any of those things. So he's in an interesting and pivotal position. Either he fiddles while Rome burns, like Nero, or he goes for something different.
Well, as poetic as it gets, Dr. Raviv Schwartz, your take?
Among the coalition or the future coalition partners of the Netanyahu family in the imminent government, I think there's a fair amount of ideological cohesion and consensus. Netanyahu himself, although I agree with Dan that he doesn't necessarily line up along those same theocratic, illiberal lines as his future coalition partners, the overriding interest of everyone in that government, including some coalition partners on the far right who might be willing to castrate gays, are among all coalition partners, there are those who want to castrate the judiciary in Israel. And on this, there seems to be wall-to-wall consent, which in my mind makes the notion of any kind of national unity government a pipe dream.
Well, I do want to go back to this point. Amit Deri, can Netanyahu really allow himself, as Dan said earlier, to be the leftist element in his own government? He's been sending out signals in recent days: the LGBTQ status quo, the issue of the judiciary. Maybe again, it is not his desired scenario here.
Yeah, I think the Israeli public knows Netanyahu very well after 15 years as a prime minister, and he's in my opinion, the moderate, the balance element in that government. And yes, the answer is yes. I think he's there to make sure that this coalition, a very unique one, very right-wing coalition, will take the right decision. And we know that Netanyahu is a real conservative, an old-fashioned conservative. He's not. He will not break status quo whatsoever. That's my opinion, and I think that's why he's getting the trust of. And that's important. Most of the Zionist Israelis, when my colleagues here previously said that half of the people voted for the left and half voted for the right, that's true. If my colleagues want to include Palestinian nationalists, Aida Tuma, Walid Taha, Sami Abu Shkhad, Balad, if they count these people with them in the same place, that's true. If not, So way more Israelis voted for a right-wing government.
Relativism in all
more
its
Jews.
force. Dan Perry, let's bounce back to the global standing. Those bombshell President Herzog recordings saying the world is terrified of the thought that Ben-Gvir will be a minister. A report on Walla news site here in Israel that the U.S. will prevent the appointment or will try to prevent the appointment of Smotrich as defense minister. How is it going to affect Israel's global standing?
Israel's global standing, if the government is a far-right government, will suffer badly, and not only vis-a-vis Europe, but also the United States for as long as Biden is in power, and also with American Jews, especially the youth among which do not support this liberal and ultra-conservative version of Israeli Judaism. I have to say the indifference that we see in Israel toward what's to come is rather stunning, and I do not think Netanyahu shares it. I'm pretty sure he knows what his position will be like on the world stage if this is the government that he sets up. And you're right about the override clause. And we should be not sanguine about what that will do. If the override clause enables the Knesset by a simple majority of 61 to cancel decisions of the Supreme Court, that means Israel no longer has judicial oversight and separation of the branches of government. And that means Israel has joined the ranks of authoritarian democracies bordering on fake democracies that you see in Hungary and Turkey, and until recently in Russia, before it became a full non-democracy. This is a very slippery slope. And if that is the path Netanyahu takes, then Israel is headed for dark times indeed.
Dr. Schwartz, let's zoom in back to the Yesh Atid party led by former Prime Minister, soon-to-be former Prime Minister Yair Lapid. A lawmaker from the party, Ram Ben Barak, suggesting today that he will give Lapid a run for his money in the next leadership race, and less than an hour later, backtracking for that. Is the Yesh Atid party getting further away from democracy?
I don't see how one is somehow implied by the other. Yesh Atid has, similar to the Likud, is probably the only other party in Knesset which has real branches, real party activists, real volunteers. It's created a significant infrastructure, which, by the way, was used by the prior permutation of the Kahol Lavan. It was on the party structure built by Yesh Atid. So it's a genuine party. I think everyone recognizes it, that it's the only serious party and sustainable party in the opposition. That there might be some internal challenges to Yair Lapid is part of that democracy. But he was a strong prime minister, despite the fact that he's right now going to be in opposition. And I don't think anyone in the party seriously questions his leadership. What I just want to add, criticism of Yair Lapid that he didn't hold the coalition together in order to mount a serious campaign against the right, I can accept that when it comes from the right. When it comes from the left, a critique of Lapid according to which he should have gone into the Arab parties and told them what to do and put his fist down, to me, that runs counter to what the left stands for. So I think Yair Lapid handled it well.
Could have, would have, should have.
Really?
Could have, would have, should have. Dr. Raviv Schwartz, Dan Perry. I mean, we ran out of time, definitely not out of passion, but be sure, much more Israeli politics to discuss.